En cette journée de non-prostitution, pour souligner l'importance d'appliquer la loi canadienne criminalisant l'achat et la vente d'actes sexuels d'autrui, entrée en vigueur le 6 décembre 2014, la Concertation des luttes contre l'exploitation sexuelle, la CLES, en collaboration avec la Maison de Marthe de Québec, organise donc cette soirée publique intitulée « Sortir de la prostitution, enjeux et défis ». Au nom des organisatrices, encore une fois, une très cordiale bienvenue. Merci de vous joindre à nous pour cette soirée. Alors que le Canada s'est doté en décembre dernier d'un nouveau cadre législatif entourant la prostitution, il nous apparaissait plus que jamais important de réfléchir et de partager ensemble avec différents experts les stratégies, services, programmes qu'il est possible de mettre en place afin de soutenir les femmes dans leur processus de sortie de la prostitution et une fois qu'elles en sont sorties. Au cours de cette soirée, nous aurons l'occasion d'entendre Rachel Moran, survivante irlandaise, auteure de Paid for My Journey Through Prostitution et fondatrice du groupe Space International. Bonsoir Rachel, merci d'être là. Également avec nous ce soir, oui, Ingeborg Cross, docteur en psychologie, spécialiste du trauma, initiatrice de la campagne Stop the Demand, demandant un changement de loi sur la prostitution en Allemagne. Docteur Kraus, merci d'être là. Bonsoir. Geneviève Duché, présidente de l'Amicale du Nid, organisme français intervenant sur la question de la prostitution depuis plus de 60 ans. Madame Duché, bonsoir. Et Simon Hagström, lieutenant détective à la section sur la prostitution et la traite humaine de la police de Stockholm. Monsieur Hagström, bonsoir. Merci à vous toutes et tous d'être là. Et nous aurons aussi le plaisir d'entendre plus tard la directrice de la Maison de Marthe, Madame Rose Dufour. Oh là là, dis donc. Et la directrice de la CLES, coordonnatrice, elle est... Non, ça va, on se calme, ça va. Elle ne veut pas qu'on l'appelle directrice. La coordonnatrice de la CLES, Diane Matt. Bonsoir. Vous voyez qu'il s'agit là pour nous d'une occasion unique d'approfondir nos réflexions sur l'égalité entre les femmes et les hommes et sur les moyens juridiques et sociaux dont se sont dotés divers pays et organismes pour lutter contre l'exploitation sexuelle, incluant la traite humaine, en remettant en question l'existence même de la prostitution et de l'industrie qui la contrôle. Le format adopté pour ce soir, les présentations, donc, à tour de rôle, dans un ordre qui a été prédéterminé, que je vous indiquerai tout à l'heure, et ce sera suivi d'une période de questions, d'échanges avec vous. Les indications, je vous les donnerai, je vous les rappellerai. Il s'agit bien évidemment d'un espace que l'on veut sécuritaire pour toutes et tous. Il faut donc qu'on puisse échanger dans le respect et dans la sérénité. Nous souhaitons une soirée constructive, des échanges et donc des débats de ce niveau-là. Et nous vous remercions d'avance d'adhérer à ce plan de match, disons cela comme ça. Nous allons tout de suite commencer avec notre première invitée. Rachel Moran, survivante, fondatrice de Space International et auteure. Après une enfance dans une famille dysfonctionnelle, Rachel se retrouve à 15 ans poussée dans la prostitution par son conjoint. Après 7 ans à être prostituée à Dublin et ailleurs en Irlande, elle réussit à s'extraire du milieu en 1998 à l'âge de 22 ans. En 2000, elle retourne aux études et termine un baccalauréat en journalisme à l'Université de la ville de Dublin. Elle a d'ailleurs reçu le Hybrid Award pour l'excellence en journalisme décerné par l'université. Rachel Moran milite activement pour l'adoption du modèle nordique en Irlande depuis sa première prise de parole publique au lancement de la campagne Turn Off the Red Light en 2011. Elle a depuis pris la parole dans plusieurs lieux et en plusieurs occasions, notamment à la Plaza des Nations Unies à New York et à l'Université Harvard. Membre fondatrice et coordonnatrice de l'organisme Space International, un regroupement international de survivantes militant pour que la prostitution soit reconnue comme une forme de violence, elle travaille en collaboration avec la Coalition contre la traite et le Lobby européen des femmes. Son autobiographie, Paid for My Journey Through Prostitution, publiée en 2013 en Europe, sortira cet automne en Amérique du Nord. Et d'ailleurs, il y a le premier chapitre, je crois, qui a été traduit en français et qui est disponible sur la table. Mesdames et messieurs, accueillez avec moi, je vous prie, Rachel Moran.
I'm going to speak briefly about two things here today that I see as problems. One of them within the sex trade surviving wing of our movement, and the other from some of the anti-trafficking groups that purportedly work for and with us. And I think what we do as sex trade surviving women, and I am guilty of this very much also, is focus on the harm and the damage and the brutality that we experienced within prostitution, but pay scant, if any, attention to the wonderful things that could have and should have been happening to us in life that didn't happen. And I'm going to read briefly from the book that I've written, because this speaks to that issue. So much of what I've written here describes the prostitution experience as an experience which is lived, which is made up of the different things that happen to you and the ways you respond bodily, soulfully, and psychically to them. All of this is true, but there is something else I must not leave out because it is important. It is that the prostitution life is shaped very much also by what does not happen as well as what does. In my adulthood, these things began to hit me. They arrived as aftershocks, particularly poignant ones. I remember several years back, while in the home of newly made friends, watching a group of teenage girls, the daughters of the house, getting ready to go out bowling. A year or two after that, in the same house, I watched the eldest daughter get ready for her debs, while her younger sisters crowded round her. Those images, teenage girls laughing, messing, heading out to have fun, stored feelings buried very deep in me. They were good images, and I smiled for the girls in them, but there was an inner eye watching another scene, and there was no smiling to be done for the girls in that one. The eye cannot appreciate a picture without considering what is left out. The lace on a woman's dress, for example, would not be lace, but for the little gaps between the cloth. Those little empty spaces are as necessary as the material to the pattern of the lace. All the things we did not get to do, those too make up a part of our picture. They were the gaps in our lace. And that is how it was. All the teenage things we never got to do also defined our experience and shaped, by their absence, how we existed in the world. And because they were the things that normal young women our age did, that caused to further separate us from a particular type of meaningful connection with the world. It was psychically a very strong sense of disconnection. It caused the feeling of being thoroughly removed. This has left from its soul-level injury the mark of a lingering scar that presents as the need to remind yourself of your own place in the world and, crucially, of your having any right to it. There may always be days I'll have to consciously haul myself back from that feeling of being removed. I'm glad I'm learning how to do that, but I will not stop hoping and working for the day this lesson no longer needs to be learned. When I say that we don't focus enough on the things that were taken from us, I think that it's something that happens because we are so busy talking about the harm and the damage and the need to stop that harm and damage and the ways that we can do that and the things that we need to give women in order that they will have viable alternatives to that. All of these are worthy things, and I do them every day myself. But I think that we really, in the midst of this struggle for social change, have forgotten that one really crucial piece of it, which is to say that the days and hours and years of our lives that were spent in prostitution were not only spent being brutalized and violated, but were hours and days and years that were stolen from us when we could have been living normal lives, with all the ups and downs and the struggles that a normal life entails. But there are also beautiful, wonderful moments of connection, and we lost all those. And that, to me, is a deep part of the damage of prostitution, and we don't look at it often enough. And I think if we did, people who've never lived prostitution, people in the general public, might have a sense of connection to what it is that we have lost, that we haven't been able to really show them. Because what I found as I've travelled the world talking about prostitution is that people, quite understandably, just cannot connect to what it is that we've lived. They don't get it. And why would they get it? They wouldn't get it any more than I would had I never lived prostitution. It's just so far outside the realm of people's conscious understanding if they've never lived it. But I'd like to encourage all of my sex trade survivant sisters here today to look a little bit more deeply into that, into what that means for them, into what are the most personally painful things that they lost simply because they missed out on them. And I know for some of the women that I work alongside, one of the deepest parts of that pain would have been losing access to their children. I know women who've had their children taken into care, and I know women who've died while their children were in care. I know women who've never had that chance. So while, you know, as a mother myself, I have struggled on and off down the years with just the basic stresses and hassles of being a parent. I sometimes, well, and most particularly a single parent, but I remind myself from time to time that a lot of my sex trade surviving sisters never had the privilege of being irritated by those hassles. The other thing that I'd like to talk about is something which for me really gets on my nerves. It's something that bothers me very deeply, and it's something that I've been watching for years now in the anti-trafficking movement. And I have been so busy dealing with the pimps and the johns, excuse me, that I haven't bothered turning my eye or my voice onto this issue until very recently. But I think it really is time that we need to start speaking about this in this movement. Because we have, God alone knows how many anti-trafficking organisations on this earth. There are tons of them. And the majority of them do not speak out against the male demand for paid sex. Now that is bald ridiculous. It's absolutely mind-blowing that these groups are advocating to protect sex-trafficked people without ever turning their eye on the reason why they're sex trafficked in the first place. It is like having, let's imagine that the abolitionist movement of 150 or so years ago, who were trying to free people caught up, kidnapped and enslaved in chattel slavery, had not had any kind of an issue with the plantation owners. That's the type of correlation we're talking about here. There's a reason why women and children are prostituted and sex trafficked, and that reason is the male demand for paid sex. So if you're going to run an anti-trafficking organisation and have nothing to say about the people whose behaviour causes your group to need to exist in the first place, what is that really when we look at it? I call it counterproductive cowardice, because that's what it seems like to me. You cannot, with any kind of sense of reasonable coherence, say, I have a problem with women and children being abused in the sex trade, but I have no problem with the male demand for the sex trade to exist. And that's something that I would like people to start calling out these anti-trafficking organisations on. Because as long as that situation continues, we're not going to make any serious headway, I don't believe. Or at least we're going to be very hampered in the headway that we make in this movement. Now, I don't want to go over time because there's several other speakers and we want to leave time for a Q&A, so I'll wrap it up quickly now. But let me just say before I leave the podium, this is the first time I've ever been to Canada, which is amazing really, because I've been to about 15 or 16 countries this last couple of years. I'm so pleased that I finally made it to Canada, and even more pleased that when I set foot on Canadian soil, I was arriving in a country where the male demand for paid sex is very firmly criminalised. So congratulations to you all.